Hello, everybody out there in YouTube land. Welcome to the season finale of Dungeons and Discussions.
Yes.
I'm your t-shirted historian, and this is my friend Grim.
Yes, I make games.
He makes games. I help make games. And sometimes make games. And speaking of games, today's season finale, I have it titled Systems, which we actually did another one called Systems, so it could be kind of confusing. I may need to go back and change this one to something a little bit differently, like, I don't know, Systems 2 or something. But really, when I say systems, I mean rules as much as anything else, as well as systems. And the reason I wanted to talk about those today is because we have played a lot of different systems over the past year and seen a lot of different rules. And I'm curious to talk about what we have enjoyed with different systems, what we've not enjoyed with different systems, and what some of the trends in systems are. And I guess I should start out with, one of the latest that we've been working with, which was Zombicide Chronicles. I've gotten a lot of feedback from the players on that one. It hasn't always really been good. I'm just being honest. As a system goes, it is basically a board game that was translated to a TTRPG. So mechanically, the TTRPG plays pretty much like the board game.
Yeah, mostly.
Mostly. Which is good and bad in parts. Yes, it does have a skill system, which does separate it from the board game. But it also has some elements that are unique to it that still feel board gamey. For example, the travel system, which nobody seems to like, and I don't blame them. I believe you guys feel like it takes away from player agency by just having the randomized encounter with a simple solution.
Yeah, so the problem is that, right, you're traveling from place to place. Maybe you should run into trouble, problematic encounters, nasty zombies, other survivors, or whatever. But the way it's presented in the book is, you run into this, here's the challenge you need to roll to overcome it. And it reduces the whole encounter down to like one skill roll. And then you carry on with your day. So what could be a descriptive and kind of evocative encounter with some roleplay around it gets reduced down to a single roll, which is less interesting. Looking at Black Plague, though, that's taken another step towards a full-on proper RPG from where Zombicide Chronicles was. So I think, kind of updating the rules to the Black Plague ones would help a lot, I think.
Yeah. Now, Black Plague does not have travel rules in it presently yet in the playtest, so we don't know if it's going to have travel rules at all. And in my opinion, it shouldn't. Because part of the feeling of the whole fantasy game is the journey as much as anything else, and the random encounter along the way.
Yeah.
And how to deal with it. And that is something that's not present. I think one of the mistakes that Zombicide Chronicles made with its travel system mechanic is it made the game very scenario-based, where the most important part of the game is everything building up to the scenario. that you're going to face at the gaming table, and less about what happens outside of it. Like the whole travel portion of getting through the zombie infested city to the area. I thought the base building aspect of it is not bad.
No.
It just needs a little bit more fleshing out.
There's some fleshing out in the companion, so which should
A
have been
little
part of
bit.
the main book.
Yeah, and that's another big complaint I have is I constantly kept having to jump back and forth between two books, and I think my constant comment on it was, this stuff should have been in the main book.
Huh.
Yeah. Kip Marlowe, who's in the game, says, yeah, travel should be redlined or treated as actual play. It's the shilly-shallying that's so undignified. Yeah, exactly. And yeah, they kind of tried to take it as a midpoint. I don't know. Now, as far as the actual combat system goes, there are mechanics in it that I do like. I think the simplified combat mechanic is good. I especially like the fact that it is up to the players to determine how they receive damage, because it makes it a little bit more tactical. And it also kind of takes a little bit of emphasis off the GM, because it's a case of, the GM is not the one who is your enemy. He's not the one assigning damage.
Yeah.
The players get to choose who is taking the damage and how to resist it.
Yeah, you wanted to make talking about trends as part of this episode, and you've touched on two already. Mm-hmm. So like base building seems to have come back in a big way, and the GM having less paperwork, less accounting to do seems to as well. So you've got things like the Cypher system or Morkborg, where you as the games master, you don't roll. The player rolls to avoid the attack. And you got the same thing in Zombicide. It's like, a standard weak zombie does 1 damage automatically if you don't avoid the blow or kill it before it can hit you. And that's as complicated as the rules really seem to get for the games master, mostly.
Yeah. The other part about it I like is the fact that for the most part, a crowd of zombies is pretty weak. And we saw this to a greater effect in Plague Bearer. But in Zombicide Chronicles, like even a pretty good-sized group of zombies, like say 10 or 20 of them, isn't that big of a threat to a decently well-armed group of players. Because they can deal enough damage to whittle the numbers down that it stops a lot of the incoming damage.
Yeah. But you have to kind of plan your turn, which is a holdover from the board game, it's something I really like about the board game. It's like, okay, if you take your turn first, you can take out those closer zombies. The other ones could reach you, but then I think the rest of us with our ranged weapons can take those out. So you go first, then we'll go. And then, you kind of plan out your turn in the board game as a group, which is good. But that feels a bit off in the role-playing game.
It's, I think it feels a little bit more tactical in the RPG part of it. I will say that one thing I have really enjoyed, and I guess it really started with Godbound, but it also persisted in Scarlet Heroes, and it's persisted in Zombicide and a few other games, is the idea that the players always get to go first. There's no rolling for initiative. I like not having to roll for initiative, for one thing. Just because, one, it's an extra step that you can avoid. The other thing is, by always letting the players go first, it eliminates one of the single problems of the GM, where players could complain that, it's like, oh, well, you didn't give us a chance. because it's like the GM is telling you straight out, it's like, you get to go first. Whatever actions you choose to take is up to you. You have the advantage at all times. So if you choose to engage, that's up to you. Or if you need to retreat and rethink this encounter or find a more advantageous position or something, that's also on the player. And it becomes less of a, oh, well, we just got screwed by initiative. That wasn't fair. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, it suits heroic games. Other games sometimes, it makes more sense for the baddies to get the drop on them sometimes, but it is another simpler thing. But sometimes initiative is much more impactful than other times. So, like when we were playing Lone Wolf Fists, you getting initiative on those 2 turns when you really shouldn't have made a huge difference. So. True.
The other part of it too is that I like about initiative is I prefer side initiative versus individual initiative. And I know that's kind of an annoying thing, but I mean, hear me out on this. The problem with individual initiative, sorry, I need more caffeine this morning, is like, let's say you have 6 players at the table and the monsters also have individual initiative. So if you are the guy who rolled last, you know that, you've got like 11 things or players taking their turn before you do. And, while it might behoove you, since you're going last, to, keep an eye on what's going on in the combat and plan your turn accordingly, most players tune out. Because you're sitting there, maybe you've got your turn all planned out. Well, the mage is taking 10 minutes to try to figure out his spell and all this crap, and you're hungry, or somebody had to go pee, so you got to wait for a turn, and it just gets annoying after a while, and I hate that because more than anything else, something that bothers me as a GM is players who are not present in the game. As far as, being present in the moment, keeping up with what's going on, and having a chance to participate. That's just a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it. I don't like it when I'm a player, and I don't want players to feel that way when I'm GMing. So why I prefer side initiative is because it's like, okay, you tell the players, okay, it's you guys' go. You determine which order you guys want to go. Anybody takes their turn whenever they wish. So if your wizard needs more time to prepare a spell, then it's kind of like, okay, well, you can go last because we're all ready to do our thing. And everybody gets their initiative out of the way pretty quick, and they get that feeling of satisfaction. Plus, it makes it a little bit easier on the GM because the GM then gets all his monsters out of the way, and he can get that kind of rapid fire. Because, players are going to pay attention whenever they're being attacked by a monster or whatever.
If they want to live, anyway.
If they want to live, yeah. So, I mean, that's just my call for that. And as a bonus on that, a game I frequently talk about that I think did the best job of doing this, and actually I think this also extends to I don't want to say Shattered Worlds, but Torg had its card system where all the players held on to cards, and the cards could impart bonuses when they were played at specific times. So one of the things that players would do is they're sitting there holding their cards, and rather than tuning out when it wasn't their turn, they're paying attention to the combat because they know that they will have an opportunity to help their friends out or help the other players out by playing cards at specific times. Like if I'm holding a card that says, this attack fails or whatever, the bad guy gets a hit in on one of the other PCs, and you play like plam, you slap your card down. And it's like all of a sudden, you have directly impacted the story, so you have the most amount of agency you're ever going to get in a role-playing game because you're literally changing things as they happen on the fly, which also feeds into the nature of the game itself because it's called the Possibility Wars, and your characters are Storm Knights who basically have control over reality so they can shift and alter probabilities as they happen. So
there was an interesting game. I forget the name of it. It was done by, might have been Contested Ground Studios, not sure. But they had this game about biker gangs where it wasn't just the roll of the dice that mattered. You had to have a tray for it, and you were trying to knock the other player's dice out of the middle. So there was an element of skill as well as randomness in how you rolled the dice. That was an interesting way of keeping people kind of engaged because they wanted to check where all the dice were at any time.
If you don't like any of these methods for initiative, another thing that I'm seeing happen more and more now is there are systems that now favor trading or bargaining for initiative amongst players and amongst enemies. Like an enemy is never going to trade for a lower initiative. They will always trade for a higher initiative because they want to go first to get the drop on the players. But if a player wants to, change his spot in the initiative order, he can bid, to the GM. It's like, hey, I want to trade initiative with this kobold or whatever. And they can do that. Which,
and
I don't know.
Some kind of bonus from it.
Yeah. And something we didn't do when we played Lone Wolf Fists is apparently there is a method of trading up for initiative or bargaining for initiative, which we never did. But hey,
yeah.
It was just two players, and it was kind of a case of whoever got initiative was going to win. It became real obvious. Other systems that I like that we've encountered over the past few years. Once again, I got to go with Kevin Crawford on this one, but the system that he uses in both Godbound and in Scarlet Heroes, where you have an extra action. In his case, it's an attack.
Yeah.
I love that.
Just a little minor spice you can add on top.
Looking up the specific rule, because I can't remember it right offhand. You'd think I would, but... Fray dice, yeah. The Fray dice. So, as a mechanic, the Fray dice, what it lets you do is every character has an extra dice that they can hold, and at any time they wish, during an attack, they can throw a Fray dice and get an extra attack, which could deal X amount of damage to an opponent. In Godbound, it tends to kill people outright, but, in Scarlet Heroes, not so much.
Yeah.
But...
you can only do that against minor opponents unless you're a mage.
Yeah. Yeah, it does only work against opponents of equal or lower level. But yeah, in Scarlet Heroes' case, the mage, his is the weakest fray dice, but it works against all opponents. And I specifically like it for the mage because it does allow the mage to keep contributing to combat without having to cast spells.
Yeah, it's a bit like Cantrip in Modern Edition, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit. The other part of that too is if we think about the fray mechanic a little bit, it's not too hard to tack on other mechanics to the fray mechanic, which you could use. For example, instead of dealing damage, you could throw a fray dice out as either a bonus dice or as a bonus action or something else, just to kind of keep it from being just a seesaw battle.
Yeah, add to your defense maybe, or boost a saving throw for that turn. Yeah, you could make it more usable in different situations, and maybe differentiate it between the classes a bit more again.
Oh yeah. Like for cleric, instead of it dealing damage, it could be like a quick heal or something.
Yeah,
Make it super useful. Now, I mean, yeah, some people could say like, well, you got feats that can do that or class abilities that can do that. I'm like, yeah, but this is a mechanic that's already built in to every single class already. So you don't have to add a whole lot of extra special rules that might, corrupt the game, as it were.
Yeah, it would replace a whole bunch of that. Like, you wouldn't need very minor healing spells if the cleric could use their fray dice to heal, like, I don't know, d6 a turn or something.
Mm-hmm. Or even just 1 through 4 hit points, or even 1 hit point, because you never know when that 1 hit point might be the difference between somebody dying and not.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be a big thing, but it's a good mechanic, and I rather like it. And I think with a little bit of expansion, it could be a mechanic that you should use for all your games.
It slots into OSR style stuff most easily, perhaps.
Uh-huh. And that is kind of something I wanted to touch on, too. And I'm not throwing any shade at anybody. I just want to make this really clear ahead of time. There has been some grumbling about the OSR here recently, and I understand why. But there's also been a lot of people who are complaining about fantasy heartbreakers, which the OSR does tend to produce quite a few of.
Yeah.
My thought is I never get tired of another game system. And I do especially like OSR-based game systems. Not because I'm really eager to have to go and learn a whole new set of rules or anything or anything like that, but what is interesting to me is all the different ways that other people have kind of tweaked their OSR game in particular to play. Whether it's, some special way that they handle races or classes or additional mechanics that add to the game. And it doesn't have to be a really big thing, it's like Ambition and Avarice too. It's like, wow, the trophy system. It's a simple thing that he added into his game that you could plonk it down into any OSR game, and it just enhances the whole experience.
That's the thing about the OSR as compared to Fantasy Heartbreakers, I think. Because the old school has so much cross-compatibility, it almost has the same level of network externality that D&D does. So D&D has so much gravity in the space because it's the big game that everyone plays. It's the company with the most money that can actually advertise and create all these tools and sponsor people on YouTube and whatever else. It just by virtue of being first and biggest, it has this gravity around it, which can make it hard to get people to play other things. With the old school games, you've got an element of familiarity to people who might want to come from D&D, but it's also different, and all of these different games, unless they're an exact copy of OSE, of course, have their own little spins and ideas and so on, and you can just take what you want from one and plug it into another pretty easily.
Yeah.
Whereas fantasy heartbreakers tend to start out as D&D only better. It does this one thing better than D&D, but in an attempt to differentiate themselves completely, they end up with a completely new system. And then that doesn't have the same network externalities. So like MCDM is an example of a high budget fantasy heartbreaker, I think, because that's not meant to be compatible with D&D, but it hits all the same tropes and so on again.
Yeah. And I think Kit has it right. Yeah, plasticity is the OSR's secret weapon. Weirdly, this is accompanied by the most extraordinary culture of heresy hunting that demands fealty to some abstract notion of proper games. And that's true. I've seen more than one person who subscribes to the we only play AD&D. And we only play this edition of AD&D. Or we're talking first edition AD&D.
Well,
I don't know anybody who plays second edition.
That's fine. If that's what you enjoy, fine. But let's not pretend it's holy writ.
Yeah.
Let's not carve the faces of Gygax and Arneson on a mountain somewhere. Let's not do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my thought about it, of course, is if it was a perfect game, then why is it that people keep developing new systems, even though they work with it?
Hubris. That's why.
I know. That doesn't mean I don't like AD&D. I like AD&D. But does it do everything I want it to do? No. Does it have a lot of really great stuff in it? Yes, absolutely. Do I pay homage to Gygax and Arneson? Of course I do. But as I've said in previous videos, there are a lot of little nitpicky things that aggravate me about it. Hit points. Being one of my chief thorns in my side for how they're described and how they work.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I guess the sizing system
Let's not get into that again.
Yeah, and how that doesn't work so well.
I've discovered with my occasional work on OSR stuff, though, I don't know why I get labeled an OSR designer. I'm not really, but it doesn't take that much to make D&D acceptable to me. Hit points, skill system, and allow people to do cool stuff during combat, and I'm set.
Yeah.
Hey, Greg.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
How's the volume?
Sounds okay, I guess. You sound kind of low.
Real low.
Maybe you're just not talking into your microphone.
I'll fix it.
Okay. Well, there are always new systems that are coming out that are OSR and OSR compatible. And I know this is probably going to be, a lot of people are going to lambaste me for it, but I'm going to say some of the ones that are less original are least interesting to me, and like chief amongst these is OSE. Old school essentials. Why? Because it really doesn't innovate on anything. It, it has some wonderful layout and design and everything, but it doesn't really improve on anything that was already published. It's just kind of like, to me, it's just a copy A
Well,
carbon copy.
I don't think it was meant to improve. I think it's part of one of the original goals of the OSR, which was to reprint and re-release things that were not available and reformat them and make them more coherent.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, mission accomplished.
Yeah, I think it was there to provide a sort of cheap, available, or freely available, sometimes basis upon which everyone could build. So, like a center point, in a way. I think it's kind of succeeded at that. Is it true they're not doing it anymore?
I don't know. I've heard some musings to that effect, but I don't know if they're going to stop or whatever. But certainly there are a lot of systems out there that are pretty much replicate the old game almost on a one-for-one basis. I mean, Labyrinth Lord, OSE, Osric, Basic Fantasy. So, and I'm not saying these are not good games or anything. I'm just saying it's kind of like you can get cheaply reprinted copies of the original things. So these systems are kind of just a matter of preference. I mean, if you just happen to like the style and layout of OSE versus Moldve Basic, then yeah, I guess pick it up because it's not really going to be that much different.
Yeah.
So what I like to see in OSR is actual changes in mechanics, classes, races, settings, things like that, original things like that, that really add something to your game.
Yeah, I think Kit was really on something with the plasticity. I've made the same argument in a different way. I've described the OSR as a dog because a Chihuahua and a Bulldog are both dogs, right? And they can breed, but they're very different to each other, and they fulfill different requirements. One's a purse puppy, and one's an ex-fighting dog that's purpose is now to have asthma. So.
I've said on more than one occasion that I was able to use Axe as a replacement for Basic or for BX when I ran it with Lost City. But Axe is pretty unique in the fact that the mechanics are so deep. It introduces so many new classes, so many new innovations, and so many new ideas, and it just models everything so well. It leans so heavily into the simulationism that it's perfect if you want a lot of crunchy D&D, basically.
Yeah, exponentially more autistic.
Yeah. It satisfies everything that you could ever want for it, pretty much. And it does add on a lot of stuff. But if I want to take let's say I think they have the Book of Layers or something, or I want to take an Axe adventure and run it, I can go grab Scarlet Heroes and play through it, or I can grab Worlds Without Number and play through it, or all these various other systems that I like. And that's what's so beautiful about it, is that compatibility. And I know that 6th edition is saying, oh, well, we're going to be able to do that too. It's like, but are you though? Because they're changing so many of the core fundamental mechanics and adding so much to their spells and adding so many new spells and so many new knickknacks and everything else that I don't really think backwards compatibility is going to be there unless you just play it as written.
Doesn't seem as possible as they say it's going to be. That's for sure.
Yeah. I just don't see how it could be.
Given how everything's been powered up, seemingly, I think you could run it, but it would be a walkover. So you'd have to ramp up the difficulty somehow.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of 2nd edition, where they're like, oh yes, when you buy second edition, it will be backwards compatible with all the first edition modules. And it ended up being that everyone just played second edition. And first edition was forgotten about for a long time.
Mm-hmm. I remember those days.
Even though it technically was, I mean, there were rules
Yeah.
differences, obviously, but not enough to make it a different game entirely by any means.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's like I don't remember second edition adding so much more to the game that you completely had to throw away all your first edition stuff.
Yeah, unlike third edition, which was definitely much different than second edition.
Yeah, because third edition added so many new rules and so much more information on every page with every character and everything, and so many different power levels because of the feats. Let's say you ran a adventure in that was formulated for AD&D first edition. That was for 3 to 5 levels. Well, a party of 3 to 5th levels would of 3.5 characters would just raffle stomp it for the most part.
I think it's just go ahead.
No.
I think it's just a human tendency, though. You see it in every other type of media for games, well, especially fighting games. Street Fighter 6 is out. Okay, all of your skills that you earned in Street Fighter 4 and 5 will be applicable to Street Fighter 6. Well,
They're not.
they're not. It's like people want to play the newest thing and stick with the newest thing. That's just how it is.
Well, yeah, and since you're using fighting game terminology, which is something I understand implicitly, one of the things that changes between all the different fighting game editions is they tend to change systems. But the difference between Street Fighter Zero or Street Fighter Alpha and Street Fighter 2 was, the Xism meters that started that appeared, or even in its own editions, like the fact that between Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and Street Fighter regular was, the fact that they had super meters. Those things changed the game. They changed the way you played the game. They changed what you were, fighting towards. That and, Street Fighter Third Strike added in tech hits and all these other things. So it's, yeah. You may have been really, really good with Ryu in Street Fighter 2, but then you play like, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and it's kind of like, uh-oh. Not only did all my, my animations and move sets changed, but, now I've got the super meter I've got to worry about.
My tactic of button mashing works whichever editions.
But of course, for casual players who played Street Fighter 2 on Super Nintendo, they know how to do a Hadouken and a Dragon Punch, and that's the same.
Yeah.
Right? So all the extra stuff that gets added to a lot of people probably doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. I guess it depends on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Yeah. All I know is that I'm quite tired of D&D based systems at this point.
And that's fair. That's fair. But I mean, what is it in particular that tires you out about it? Is it level-based systems?
It's just the standard burnout of working on something for so long and so hard that you just feel like you're sick of it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's something to talk about as far as the systems go. I've complained about level-based systems because I get that people like them because they do show a definite advancement and progression for characters. but I don't like the fact that level systems also tend to promote power bloat, which is why I prefer systems that don't necessarily pump up your hit points, but you can experience that you gain can be used to increase your levels of skill or buy new abilities and things like that, which is, one of the strengths of the old storyteller system or RuneQuest or, a lot of these other systems that aren't level based.
I think the experience is different for a game creator versus a player or dungeon master, though, of course, because as a person who makes game books for D&D, the thought always runs in my head. It's like, why I've done everything that I need to do for 5th edition. What else can I do? What else? I'm done. Like, I feel done with it, but there are people who will continue playing 5th edition for many years. So, like, as a player, it's a different perspective, I think.
Yeah. That's why I so rarely revisit games that I've written. It's because I'm on to the next interesting thing. And that's what interests me, creating new things. But it means my games aren't supported particularly well, which puts people off buying them for some reason.
Hey, I tried to support one of your games. I don't think it's selling particularly well, but I told you to change the title of the book, but... But, that's the thing. It's like people who are happy with the systems that they have, they'll continue to play it. I mean, that's why we have Lamentations of the Flame Princess. In practice, it's not much different from BX. It's got some slightly new mechanics as far as a skill system. It has a few changes as far as the basic classes go with what the characters gain. It has a big change in the way magic works, and especially with an elimination of a lot of the spells.
Yeah.
And it does have its own particular kind of gritty feel, but I think a lot of Lamentations' appeal comes from its setting, and more specifically, a lot more than a lot of other games, I think, Lamentations is really, really driven by the modules, the adventures, as much as anything else, because I honestly can't see you running a lot of Lamentations freeform sandbox. You know what I mean?
It's a weird one, because standard acknowledgement in the industry is that modules sell the least well.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, core books and expansions to rules that sell well. Raji hasn't done much in the way of expansions. It's mostly modules.
Yeah.
But a big part of the appeal of Lamentations, I think, was not so much the rules set. It was the presentation. It was the implied setting. And then through the adventures, we've seen all this weird, freaky, somewhat edgy stuff, which helps maintain that mood if you're playing Lamentations at your table. So I think that Raji has such a strong sort of guiding hand over the system, helps maintain that feel, which is what the big selling point is of that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. It's like I could see somebody buying, or actually you really don't need to buy it because you have all the rules readily available to you without all the artwork. You could just get the Lamentations of the Flame Princess core book and run games using that system. Freeform, sandbox, whatever. But it doesn't have the same impact as if you try to run, some of the adventures, like, what is it, Fecal Lands? stuff like
Possibly
that.
not the best example.
Maybe not the best example, but I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, that's a pretty hardcore example of something that you can't get in any other game system, really. I mean,
Yeah.
could you imagine, current day Wizards of the Coast selling Winnie the Shit? No,
Yeah.
you can't. So,
Nor would I want to. I do not
Yeah.
want to imagine.
well, that's not even the point, though. It's just that it's kind of a weird anomaly amongst a lot of the game systems, because it's like Grim said, most people can get away with just buying a core book and maybe an expansion to the rules. And again, I have to cite Kevin Crawford stuff. He really doesn't release much in the way of adventures. I think he just released a small adventure bit for Worlds Without Number, and that's been out for a few years.
Yeah. According to feedback that I personally have received, including an adventure or two, like a full adventure in the back of my book, and no one ever reads those or uses them ever. Like I haven't heard a single instance of someone using the adventure that's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I always complain about adventures in the book.
Right.
Save me the pages. Put the cover price down a bit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And Crawford, for the most part, just gets away with selling core books. But Lamentations gives away its core book for free, but it banks on the adventures. Period.
But then Eclipse Phase, when they started out, they gave away the core book for free. And they didn't really sell adventures. What they did sell was more lore material on the rest of the universe. So that's another approach. What if we reverse this kind of question, though? What about games that have new mechanics but are the same old fantasy tropes that we all know and tolerate? So like Daggerheart, that's on the way. Standard fantasy tropes, different system, MCDM. There's other examples out there.
I was actually thinking Barbarians of Lemuria. Because that one has a unique mechanic. That one, it's been a while since I picked up the book to look at it, and I do own a copy. But if I remember right, that one uses a dice pool mechanic.
I can't remember offhand. I think so. And instead of skill lists, you have character types that you have levels in. So if it's something a barbarian could do, you can roll on your barbarian level, and so on.
But that's a system I'm starting to see these more and more now. Is a lot of systems are gravitating towards pool mechanics, which it's not new, obviously, because Vampire had all of Story system had pool mechanics, but they're kind of they're kind of coming back into vogue, I think. Or am I wrong?
No, you're right.
I think you're right. The other thing is still like Powered by the Apocalypse or derivations thereof. It seems if something's not 5th edition compatible, it seems to be designed to either go in with that or one of its derivatives, like Blades in the Dark or something else. I don't see that as a good thing, because I don't think it's a terribly good system. Other people have good times with it. That's fine. It just doesn't seem to work for me, no matter what. But it is another example of a sort of paucity of imagination and an unwillingness to try other things.
I kind of think a lot of that stems from what your first game was. And what I mean by that is whatever system you first played, whatever got you introduced to the hobby, that kind of tends to be your favorite, because that was the experience that brought you to the table. That was the experience that really gave you the most fun, usually, because it introduced you to a whole new world, a whole new way of doing things, and a whole new way of having fun that you didn't experience previously. So it tends to be the system that you favor the most. And if somebody's first experience with a role-playing game is, powered by the apocalypse, they're probably going to stay with that because that's what they're comfortable with. That's what they're familiar with. That's what they got introduced to the game system with.
Well,
I don't think any. Go on, Greg.
I think to Grimm's point as well, I personally don't know how easy it is to write a game for Powered by the Apocalypse, but I've bought quite a few PDFs with that system and similar systems, and I think there is an aspect of this is really easy for me to just make whatever I want with this. It's like, unlike a D&D book, which people were expecting lots of random charts and things that are difficult to fill out and maps, and you don't really need that with Powered by the Apocalypse. You just have this kind of cinematic thing, and then it's like a story game.
You have the playbooks, which are tedious to write.
Yeah.
But they're not that complicated, and it is simple, I suppose. But as we ran into trying to play Candela Obscura, that simplicity can get in the way, and can actually lead to gameplay being more complicated and strenuous than it needs to be. But I don't think I would be hard pressed to think that barely anyone started with Powered by the Apocalypse. I doubt any of those were many people's first game, but then the sort of theatre kid side of the hobby seems to have gravitated towards PBTA.
Well, my only experience with Powered by the Apocalypse is playing in a game of Wicked Ones, and I didn't not enjoy the experience. I thought it was okay. It might have been better if, the game had been more consistent and, we'd have been playing it as often as we were supposed to. But it kind of ended up being a case of people couldn't make it, people lost interest, and then eventually the game just kind of fell apart after a couple of sessions. But a lot of Wicked, or I should say, well, I have to say Wicked Ones because that's the one that I played. A lot of Wicked Ones kind of felt a little bit like, almost like a Mother May I kind of game. Mother May I do this kind of thing? Okay, I built this character. Okay.
Yeah, but the characters are kind of squishy and lack definition, so it's often not clear whether a character should be able to do something, which then is a lot of social and analytical stress on the games master. Yeah,
and that may be why the game shut down early. I mean, maybe the games master in our case wasn't used to dealing with that kind of a game. I mean, I really can't say. I don't know why that game shut down, other than it just seemed like everybody didn't have any time and lost interest in it, and it didn't continue.
The only reason I even know about Powered by the Apocalypse isn't because of thirsty sword lesbians or anything like that, but like in my quest of finding and buying as many popular kaiju mecha games as I could, I discovered that a lot of them, not all, but a lot of the PDFs I bought were built on some kind of cinematic storytelling type of system like Powered by the Apocalypse. And they were all the same. It's like they're trying to do the tokusatsu anime Voltron stuff, and they all used the cinematic thing where you could do something cool with your character, and you had like cool points and you had like plot armor, and that's not what I want. I mean, I can see how it works for a lot of those settings, but damn, it's like, come on, dudes, try something new. Grimm tried something new with his game.
Oh, thank you. I was aiming more for a Pacific Rim sort of feel.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I don't know
and that
where
was
my
Fate.
I don't know where my point was going with that. It was like something to do with setting define or rules define setting, I think.
Yeah.
And the basic expert has had videos about that as well. I kind of am on board with the idea that a rule system can define the setting, the overall look and feel of the game, and that's probably why a lot of those type of games go towards a Powered by the Apocalypse feeling. But it just is, it's lacking the nuance and depth that I think it needs for long-term play. Like a lot of these games probably are played once or twice, maybe once, and then they get shelved because there's just not a lot of depth there.
Not a lot of space for character advancement either.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a game like Lancer, which I'm not shitting on Lancer. Well, I am actually. Fuck Lancer, but it just seems so confused and like what it wants to do, and like I don't know. I like a more coherent thing. Have any of you guys ever looked at Lancer or played it?
Yeah,
I've never even heard of it.
I've got a printout of the PDF. It was a darling for a while. It's an underdeveloped role-playing game, a tactical skirmish game, and then they've tried to make up this big sprawling history and stuff to it. So yeah, it's getting pulled three ways at once. And yeah, like Greg says, it's very confused, and it ends up not being particularly good at any of the three things. But some people get fanatical about it and argue with me endlessly in my comments. So
I found it to be confusing. Like they have special little symbols that represent things in the book, and you have to know what the symbol means. I don't know. I'm just not a fan of that type of thing.
Yeah, I could understand why that wouldn't be pretty cool. Because I mean, having to memorize all this little extra, quick language is a hassle. It's much easier to just keep track of straight numbers and stuff like that.
You think you're being clever color coding your pages and having little symbols when just titling it would be great. That would be fine.
Well, I mean, that kind of falls into a realm of playability and layout as much as anything else. Having a character sheet that's all full of kind of weird symbols and layouts and stuff like that can be kind of daunting because you're trying to track all this stuff. Where just simple lines would be easier.
Yeah,
and I've seen a few systems that were like that. I mean, the one I always bring up as just being like the most confounding and yet the most pretty that I've ever seen was Immortal, where absolutely beautiful artwork all the way through it, absolutely gorgeous, wonderful looking books, but trying to figure out how to play it, it's like it's harder than Chinese algebra.
Yeah. You needed a fistful of D10s of every color of the rainbow to play it. It's difficult.
Yeah. Cards and custom dice are a no for me. What if I lose one? How am I gonna go? I have to go find another one, a custom dice or a card.
Yeah,
So
custom.
And does my whole group have to buy all these special dice as well? Or are we going to hand round one set of sweaty dice that doesn't have enough of one particular sided dice anyway?
I do like card mechanics, just because I do like Torg. The only problem with that is if you're not playing it in person, it's kind of a pain because you have to somehow simulate digitally the card system, so that makes that kind of a pain in the butt. So that's kind of where that what is it called? It's not called Shattered Worlds, but it's something
Savage Worlds?
Savage Worlds, yeah. Because Savage Worlds has a card system too, but I think it just uses regular playing cards, doesn't it?
Yeah. So it's relatively easy, but again, if you're not playing in person, it loses a lot of what makes it fun in person. Especially if you're playing Deadlands and you're flinging chips and cards across the table, then that helps with the the Old West feel of it. It feels out of place in a lot of other settings and so on.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of likewise why I think some of the other specialty games like that are kind of a hard sell, because like it or not, in-person gaming is kind of dwindling, I think. I think we're moving a lot more towards digital gaming, not necessarily VTT, but just playing over the internet, whether it's our phones or whatever.
And in theory, that should make things easier, but in practice, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. But as far as getting into systems and things, another thing I think is kind of important, and Greg kind of briefly, touched on it, is playing kind of rules as written.
I am an attorney at Raw.
Yeah.
I'm one of the 4 official attorneys at Raw, along with Crossface, the Basic Expert, and Victor Gorcha.
Oh, I'm with you on that. More and more, I really start to see the advantage of playing Raw. So, for me, the trick really is, if you're going to play Raw, at least make sure that you have a system that you're really comfortable with and that you like, that you can handle being played Raw. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think most well-designed systems should be played Raw. Like, if you have to change something because the rulebook doesn't have it, then it's not a well-designed system, in my opinion.
Well, like I said, the nice thing I like about OSR stuff is that you can steal things from one game system and stick them in another. So, for me, the game system I like played Raw would probably be a Crawford game, because I really like the way he's done stuff. I like, I like his skill system. I like how his character classes are very customizable. I like the way he handles races. And honestly, with the latest edition of Cities of Numbers, I really like the way that he handles firearms and armor and weapon damages and things. So if I had to play a Crawford game Raw, I absolutely would. But that doesn't mean there are not things from other OSR games that I wouldn't mind including in a Crawford game. And I'm not talking major rule changes or anything, but I'm talking like little things like, Ambition and Avarice's trophy system. Perfect. Or something similar to that effect. I'm not so sure about the spells from any other game system, because those can really shake up your game. But,
Well, I was introduced to role-playing games as games. They weren't introduced to me in the 90s as collaborative storytelling experiences. It was told to me, this is a game. Here are the rules. Here's how you fill out your character sheet. You follow these rules. So to me, just not playing Raw, it doesn't click with me. I don't understand it. Like, to me, there's a game element to it that must be followed. Otherwise, what's the point? I don't know. That's just me, though.
Mm-hmm. And this comment is, for me, it's really simple. Start playing Raw, and when needed, start changing. when you started off by changing things, you found that surprise, surprise, the game designer knew more than me. Yeah, that's also kind of my discovery, more or less, is the fact that if you play a game raw, you're playing it as intended. You'll find that, yeah, the designer, if he's play tested the game well enough, he's already got imbalances figured out. So the game is not imbalanced if you're playing it as it was intended to be played. But when you start changing up and omitting things, that's when stuff starts to get off kilter, and then you start having a bad experience with that game, and you want to start looking for a different one.
Yeah, it's like,
You know.
we brought this up a couple of times on stream, but Macros's gladiator class.
Mm-hmm. That's
The one guy-
specifically the one I was thinking about.
Yeah, the guy's like, well, it's not a very good class. Well, it's just overpowered, and it's like, did you play it as it was written in the book? No, we changed this, and this. Well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
I think you should have some mastery over the rules of the game. Not necessarily even mastery, just a basic understanding before you go changing things.
Right. Because everybody's always talking about Rule 0. But having said that, yeah, Rule 0 is a case of, you use Rule 0 after you've mastered the rules. It's kind of like, then you know what you can change. It's kind of like art. You have to understand how to create art and what makes it art before you can start breaking the rules of art.
And I promise it sounds like we're aping the Basic Expert Substack article, but I swear we're not.
No, I mean, he's right about that. Jeff Rowe's right about that as far as, playing rules is written. There's a reason for it.
But a lot of games have a core mechanic, right?
Mhm.
With which you can do just about anything. But so what you need is not more rules necessarily, but guidelines, right? So if the rules say, here's how you do stuff, set a difficulty, roll X, add Y, if you exceed the difficulty, you succeed. I mean, essentially that covers all situations ever. So, it's kind of covered.
Well, and that's kind of the next thing I was going to bring up. So let's say you have a system that's very simplified, and it doesn't necessarily have a rule that covers everything. I'm not saying you should play a game that has a ton of rules and has a rule for every single instance of everything that can happen. Because as we found out with 3.0, 3.5, and Pathfinder First Edition, having too many rules can be just as frustrating and inhibiting as not necessarily having a rule that covers every situation. One of the reasons I do like Scarlet Heroes is because in the same vein of old OD&D or BX and stuff like that, is not everything is covered by rules, so it does give players an opportunity to just kind of try things out and do things.
Yeah. There's guys like Professor Dungeon Master who prefer to have a character sheet fit on an index card. Everything fits on an index card and it's easy to understand. And I can get that. I don't want to go that far, but what I do like is for you to be able to look at a completed character sheet and understand how to play the game.
Mm-hmm.
From that, all the important rules for playing the game are right there at your fingertips on the character you've created.
Yeah, I tend to be one of these people that I like it if there's 4 or 5 character sheets that add lots of extra detail and stuff to your character, but not if it's necessary. You know what I mean? Like if you have a 5-page character sheet, but one of those pages is a page for hirelings, and one of those is a page for your animal companion, and one of those is a page for your equipment or something like that. that's fine because you don't necessarily need to refer to all those pages all at once. As long as all your main stuff to run your game or to run your character is on that first page, I'm cool with that. That's the way it should be. You know, you got your stats, you got your skills, you got your weapons or whatever on there on your first page, or your abilities. Good. You've got a good game system there that'll work.
Yeah.
But when I absolutely have to have multiple pages in order to play the character, you're like, oh, wait a minute, I got to flip to page 3 because I got to look up how this power works and all that. That's when you're getting too complex.
That's why I kind of want to go to 2 pages for my character sheet for this game. Because, you know, I originally 1 page can be enough, but there's just... I don't want people to have to open the book to find out what a skill does or what a power does. Like, there should be enough room to write that out. So I'm probably going to have it go front and back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know that's kind of that's a point that Harmony, Ginger, and we disagreed on, and that is that she wants a rule to cover every single instance of everything that you can do in a game, so that there is no question of Mother May I, and so that players have a consistent rule in place to follow whenever they want to do something, or that they have an idea what they can do. And I understand that. But at the same time, like I said, too many rules just inhibit things for me.
There's a sweet spot somewhere. Right?
Yeah.
Things like Candela Obscura, they're too loose and squishy. Mm-hmm. So you end up having to make on-the-fly rulings, which might be contradictory or not make sense in the longer term, or might make a player feel cheated, and all of those kind of problems. If you got too many rules, then you inevitably end up with some sort of contradiction or too many subsystems, and you end up hunting through the book for the specific system for the situation, when you would probably be better off just going back to the core rules. And a lot of simple systems that aren't story games also become super complicated, which is a bit of a bugbear for me lately. You look at Tristat or Savage Worlds or a lot of other games that at their core seem really simple, but then there's so many different exceptions and interactions, and which thing has supremacy over what. Do I have a special edge or talent? Is there a spell and operation? Does someone else have an edge or talent that maybe negates part of that, or does it negate all of it? Yeah. It just rapidly becomes complicated despite setting out simply because they're trying to make a rule for everything.
Yeah. Well, see, that's part of why in my gold bestseller, very, very good game.
You sound like Pundit.
Historically authentic kaiju game. Bestseller. I decided to include like a simple rule system as an alternative, so you can go fast and loose if you want to, or you can stick with the default, which is more complicated.
Historic, authentic kaiju game?
Yes. Only someone with as much history and knowledge of kaiju games can make such a thing, of course.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. We have rules that govern kaiju now.
I mean, there are monsters in Hieronymus Bosch paintings, so we know that giant monsters lived back in the medieval period.
Yeah.
So, we have to put them in, so it's completely authentic.
Of course.
I did post about the weird lizard people from the Ubaid period. I thought that was creepy. Have you seen those sculptures?
No, I haven't.
Not to get off topic, but they're like from 5000 BC, and it's like depicts these like lizard people, and like one of them has a child, and the child is also a lizard. It's really weird. Like you wouldn't think something like that would be real.
Well, it's like I told people on more than one occasion. You see those cave paintings in France that cavemen did, where they have these pictures of these great big giant, bovines. And, my first impulse when I looked at those was, man, those guys really didn't have any idea about what perspective was. But then later on, I found out that there was a species of bovine that existed back then called aurochs that were massive bovines.
Yeah.
I mean, they were huge creatures, and they no longer exist.
'Cause
So
we
I'm
ate them all.
yeah, we ate them or killed them all, and so he was like, so no, the cavemen might have actually been correct on their perspectives. It's just the damn cows were that big back then to them. Because they
People
were.
were shorter as well, of course.
That also. So you never know. If a comment here, a lot of people seem to forget that there are different types of games. Some are close to being a sim, some are gonzo. Choose the right rules for the right context. Yeah, that's also a thing, of course. You know, how simulationist do you want to get with your game? Are your players really down for that? I'm going to say for the most part, the players I've encountered don't necessarily need that much amount of crunch to enjoy their game. And again, it's like, you know, I do play with a rules lawyer. So the more rules that you give him to lawyer, it tends to make the game more tedious. Because, yeah, he's got all the rules memorized, and unfortunately, it's a case of, you know, anytime you skip one or leave one out, he's going to remind you every time, hey, you forgot to do this.
Well, that just goes back to what Grim Jim and you guys were talking about when I joined. It's like people, yes, they choose the right rule set for the right setting and the right type of game, gonzo, sci-fi, whatever. But people weren't doing that. They want to shove everything into OSR or 5e. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. They just want to shove it in and try to make it work, even if it doesn't make any sense to do that.
So, simulationism, though, that was big in the 80s, right? There was a lot of people trying to chase, you know, how can we make our games more realistic? BRP is partially down to that desire to make things more realistic. I like BRP fine.
I like BRP.
It's the thin end of that wedge, I think.
Yeah.
Then you had things like Millennium's End, which tried to do a really realistic shooting system by having plastic overlays over silhouettes of people to see where you hit.
Or Phoenix Command.
That. Yeah, Phoenix Command and
Delta Force.
The leading edge Aliens game.
Yes.
Boy, was that an IP mismatch.
Boy, do I have it.
You know, but that trend seems to have gone away. But at the same time, Axe did pretty well, and people have never stopped playing Traveller. And in my experience, the most anal retentive simulationist players tended to always gravitate towards Traveller.
Yeah, I've noticed that a little bit. I personally have never played Traveller, but I know a little bit about it.
Yeah, so there was this group of slightly older people, so I didn't really play with them very much. They all played Traveller, and they were all mathematicians and scientists. So they would actually work out the actual reaction mass and so on at the table with their scientific calculators and slide rules and shit. It was a bit intimidating, you know. They were really into the minutiae and wanted it to be as realistic as possible. And in my regular group, I have a scientist as well. He likes keeping notes for everybody. He's weird, but it's convenient for everybody else. So, yeah, just let him do it.
I had a player like that. He had a whole notebook that he did with like a quill pen and some kind of cursive that looked like fucking Lord of the Rings. And he drew like Da Vinci style like sketches of things. Like, it was a work of art. And it was just the notes from the campaign. I was like, damn, dude. It was like, but I have to respect it. I have to give him some respect for that.
I'd give you a bonus experience point, but it would cheapen it.
Yeah. And it's like, instead of writing his bonus experience point in the notes, it would be like trained with a master swordsman. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. He was into it. That's the kind of player I like, though. I like the player that is really into it and is trying to have like a fun time at the table.
Yeah. And that takes many forms, but just enthusiastic players who do something extra is always nice.
They'll just sit there like a slug and be on your phone. It's annoying.
Yeah. T-shirt, do you know you're muted, or I didn't see it? Oh, is there a comment? Oh, yeah, phone call. All right, so we have to fill the empty air with noise. I sent you something on Twitter, Greg.
Oh yeah, I'll have to look at that. I
In
haven't
your-
checked Twitter today.
In your DMs.
Nice. Yeah, I plan to do some playtesting for that game, maybe even this weekend, but we'll see.
Cool.
What have you been doing, Graham, in terms of system wise? Any new thoughts on going somewhere new?
So I've still got these house repairs ongoing, which I need to raise money for. So I've been trying to do a few things quickly. So tinkering with the OSR isn't exactly new to me, but it's newish. So I've been challenging myself a bit to do a few small things, tackling Racer's class, because I hate Racer's class. So it's quite a challenging design exercise to create Racer's class. So I'm doing that for several of the monstrous races and some rule tweaks and stuff. So that's where I'm going with that.
I did one of those for OSE and put it on itch.io, and I don't think I'll do another one because I'm like, this is too much. I don't want to make a whole custom experience table for a race. That seems weird to me.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what people used to do, though, for BX. So.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it is. I did it. I just don't know if it's my favorite thing.
Yeah. I don't know. My feeling on leveling systems anyway is kind of like, but I understand they're popular, and it's just kind of like, well, it's what we do. It's what we live with.
Got to chase that little hit of dopamine when you level up.
Uh-huh.
Although these MMOs have hundreds of levels.
Yeah. Which kind of leads me to another system that we haven't touched on, which I have mixed feelings about. I don't want to stretch this episode out too long, but it is our finale, so might as well enjoy it. Point buy systems. I like point buy systems in theory because, yeah, it's very granular and it does let you build a character pretty much specifically the way you want to. The problem I have with point buy systems is, one, it takes a very long time to build characters usually. And two, it doesn't take very long to kill characters usually. And three, point buy systems, more than any other kind of system I've ever seen, really, really tend to get exploited really hard by players.
Maybe I'm inexperienced with this whole point buy thing. What are some games?
GURPS, Hero System.
Oh, GURPS, yep, of course. Yeah, I've played GURPS.
Yep.
There was a Hero version that was Interlock, I think. Not Heroes Unlimited. One of the other ones.
That's Champions.
Champions, that's the one. Yeah. We found some hella big loopholes in that. So if your character's missing a limb, you get a certain amount of points back, and it stacks up higher if you've got even less limbs. So you turn your character into a quadriplegic, and then the superpower extra limbs is 1 point per limb. So you could make your character a quadriplegic and then give them extra limbs to get all your limbs back, and you came out on top when it came to points thanks to that. That was always fun. Yeah. Or you'd end up with points left over, which would lead to some really stupid things. Like we had a character called Titan who could turn himself into a giant, but he had points left over, just enough to buy like the slowest possible flight speed. So he could essentially hover at like 5 feet a turn or something.
I think one of my friends found a way to break GURPS in a way because he had a character who was a giant. I mean, like literally a giant, but he gave the character dwarfism. So he became like normal sized. So he was a giant with dwarfism, but he had all the giant abilities.
And all the dwarf abilities.
Well, dwarfism was a disadvantage.
Wow.
So yeah, he became like a, he had, like I said, he had all the abilities of giants, which was, their strength, their throwing rocks, all that cool stuff that giants can do, except that he was medium sized.
You're medium sized. Actually, no, you're not. You're
I'd call you diminutive, but that's not in the current edition.
But yeah, I like point buy systems, like I said, but yeah, they're so easily abused, and yeah, it's too quick to get a character killed, and it just takes too long to build them.
Yeah, merits and flaws are kind of the light version of that, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when Vampire introduced the merit and flaw systems, and it, woo boy, that got, you had to put a limit on those things quick.
Yeah.
And the thing I always hated about merit and flaw systems is it really became incumbent on the DM to enforce the flaws. Because you knew the player was going to take advantage of the merits every chance they got, but they rarely would enforce their flaws. So a GM had to know the flaws and had to enforce them constantly.
That's what I really liked about the older version of Deadlands, which then became Savage Worlds, is you got chips for bringing up your flaws.
Mm-hmm.
So the players were endlessly bringing up their flaws so they could get chips to buy successes and experience points. So yeah, that was a really good way of making people act like their flaws actually were flaws. Well, it did lead to a rather chaotic game.
You mentioned another system though that I really got interested in after you mentioned this. I forget what it was. It was some Japanese system, I think you said, but the characters actually, they start powering up the more they get injured.
Tenra Bansha Zero.
Yeah.
Yeah, the more injured you get, the more powerful you get. So it kind of encourages players to admit that they're taking damage and to keep an accurate record of it up to a point. So
yeah. See, I like stuff like that because it does kind of fit the heroic mold. It does, then that feels very anime-esque. But how hard is that game to get?
I mean, I got it fairly recently, so I think it's around. There was a reprint not too long ago, I think.
Huh. I may look into that in the future then. And I am kind of curious to see how Fabula Ultima shakes out, because it is kind of one of those point-buy systems, and it does have the merits and flaws too, if I remember correctly.
I think so.
So, yeah, whenever we get around to playing that, that'll be kind of curious to see how that shakes out, because I love the system in theory, and I love how free it lets you get with your character creation. But yeah, if it becomes a game of inches where you're trying to sneak in all these flaws and stuff in order to get these huge benefits that overpower the game, I'm going to be very disappointed.
I don't think so. I need to reread it and make up some pre-gens. So
same. But all right, guys, I don't know if we've exhausted this topic or if we're just tired or what. I mean, we've been at an hour and 30 minutes.
It's hot here, and I'm tired.
Yeah, I'm also kind of sleepy myself. So that, and everybody seems to have picked right now to call. I don't know why. Maybe it's just that time of the morning. But shall we go ahead and close it down for season 4?
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. So there you go, guys. We didn't necessarily solve all the world's problems with this episode, but we definitely highlighted a few, and we did bring up a few good points, and hopefully got some conversation going in your head about different systems and different rule sets and why you should follow the rules and when you shouldn't follow the rules. and what are good rule systems to use and what are bad systems to use, kind of depending on your preference. But that's going to be it for this season of Dungeons and Discussions, at least for now. We'll be back again, I guess, in late May or June of next year, so 2025.
Other than the odd occasional episode, possibly, depending on days off and opportunities and things like that.
Yeah, there will be a few times during the year when we'll pop back in for a quick discussion on something here and there, but for regular Tuesdays, this is pretty much it. So until we see you again, thanks for hanging out with us this year, and hope we see you on all of our other shows like Tuesday with Geeks tonight, or Week in Geek on weekends, or our gaming sessions on Sundays.
Yes.
But till then, y'all take care, and we'll see ya.
Bye-bye.
Look! The Dungeons and Dragons ride!
Exercise.